T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
12 miles. We are contact approaching 5 miles. Contact 70 miles, final break. 230. Mile and a half.
Single contact. 6,000 feet, speed 350, 340. Heads up, it's 30 west, tally ho.
Team.
1 Alpha has 2 contacts, 166 at 11, Angels 5.
My guest today is a true inspiration to me and many others. His life is simply amazing, and no description that I can write will come close to providing you with a full understanding of the accomplishments, career, personality, and the man himself. I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, very close to where our guest is from. I can identify with a lot of his personal story and the trials and tribulations he overcame in becoming the man he is today. He lists General Chuck Yeager, another native of West Virginia, as one of his personal heroes, and I'm proud to say that our guest himself is one of mine. Mr. Homer Hickam is a veteran of the United States Army, a former NASA engineer, and member of the U.S. National Space Council. Prior to his NASA career, Mr. Hickam served in the U.S. Army as a lieutenant after volunteering to serve during Vietnam, where he was awarded the Army Commendation Medal and the Bronze Star. After leaving the U.S. Army with the rank of captain, Mr. Hickam went to work for the Army Missile Command as a federal civilian on the Hellfire missile program, and later NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. During his NASA career, Mr. Hickam worked in spacecraft design and crew training. His specialties at NASA included training astronauts on science payloads and extravehicular activities. He also trained astronaut crews for many Spacelab and Space Shuttle missions, including the Hubble Space Telescope deployment mission, the first 2 Hubble repair missions, Spacelab-J, which was the first Japanese astronaut, and the Solar Max repair missions. Mr. Hickam is currently the board chair of the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, also known as Space Camp, in Huntsville, Alabama. Prior to his retirement in 1998, Mr. Hickam was the Payload Training Manager for the International Space Station program. Mr. Hickam's autobiography, Rocket Boys, was turned into the movie October Sky, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. Mr. Hickam was appointed to the National Space Council's User Advisory Group in 2018, which assists U.S. government agencies like NASA organize and coordinate their space efforts. So without further ado, let's bring in my very special guest, Mr. Homer Hickam. Mr. Hickam, thank you for joining us today.
Well, hey, Jeremy, it's great to be with you, a fellow West Virginian. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wasn't born in West Virginia, but I grew up there through my formative years, and it's the place is like a magnet. You know, when you're there, you're dying to get out, but once you leave, you're dying to get back. It's it always brings you around full circle somehow.
Well, it does. You know, it just seems like that West Virginia's greatest export is its people. We get raised there. We learn a lot about hard times and about how to overcome hard times, if you will.
Yes.
And then we go out to the world and try to teach others how to overcome hard times as well. So
it's an incredible population that we have in West Virginia.
Indeed.
It absolutely is. So thank you for joining me today. You are a man of incredible accomplishments. Your life story is pretty well known through your books and your movies, and you have another book coming out. If it hasn't come out already, Don't Blow Yourself Up. I believe it's called, and I have a link here down at the bottom for anybody who's interested in taking a look and purchasing your book. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, Don't Blow Yourself Up is the true sequel to Rocket Boys or October Sky. It came out in late October. It's done very well. It's already on its second printing. Matter of fact, I just happen to have a copy of it here. Don't Blow Yourself Up. And Don't Blow Yourself Up, the title comes from when I first got interested in the space business back when the Russians launched Sputnik in 1957. At the kitchen table, we would go around the kitchen table and everybody would have to tell my mom what we did that day and what we were going to do the next day. And when it got to be my turn, because I was so enamored by seeing Sputnik fly through the night sky, that October night sky, I said, I'm going to build a rocket. And my dad, he was probably thinking about something that happened up at the mine, so he didn't say anything. My older brother, who was the big football star and got all the girls, he just laughed. He thought that was just another stupid thing that his little brother would do. But my mom took a long look at me and she said, well, don't blow yourself up. And I took that as permission for everything that happened since. So I thought it was a good title. It was a title that a lot of people quote from the book and the movie. And the new memoir is the 40 years after the Rocket Boys era, which included that time at Virginia Tech where a few other cadets and I built the skipper, the big cannon. And then and I graduated from engineering school, and then the Vietnam War, and then working underwater, scuba diving, and then NASA, and then writing the book Rocket Boys, and then the movie October Sky. So I ended there, 40 years, 1960 to 2000. So that's what the new memoir is all about.
Now, are we going to expect a film to come out of this new book?
I doubt it. I mean, let me just tell you, I see a lot of times on Facebook or Twitter or whatever about an author that says, "Oh my gosh, my book's been optioned. It's been by Hollywood and blah blah." And it's like many books are optioned, but very, very few are made. It's really a miracle to get a major motion picture made out of one of your books. So I didn't write it from expecting anything like that. Some of the other books, though, Sky of Stone almost got made into a Hallmark movie, and The Colwood Way they're always talking about, let's make a Christmas story out of The Colwood Way. We'll see, but I kind of had my Hollywood miracle, and I'm satisfied with that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now that this show is primarily a science and UFO based podcast, excuse me. I was doing some background research on you for a while before this show came about, and I ran across a quote from you, and I'm paraphrasing because I have a horrible memory, but you had said something about the fact that we were talking about government bureaucracy, that you had met the government, or you had worked in the government, and it was a nightmarish quagmire or something to that effect, and I wanted to touch on the ideas that we're going through now in disclosure process, and why the US government is now talking a little bit more about UFOs and UAPs than they have in the past, and kind of go over what may be considered overclassifications and why a lot of this is redacted and blacked out and buried under mountains of red tape. I mean, we're all familiar with the ideas of the preservation of national security when it comes to potential foreign adversarial tech or our own technology that we don't necessarily want to get out there. But even recently as last week, we had a redacted file come out that was talking about the shapes of UAP and UFOs, and it was completely blacked out and redacted. Do you have any insight on why the government operates the way that they do in these scenarios?
Well, I think, a lot of times different aspects of the government doesn't talk to other aspects of the government. Different bureaucracies don't talk to each other. I know you're way too young for this, but there was actually something called Project Blue Book back in the 1950s, where the Air Force had a group that was looking at UFOs and presented some reports on it that sounded very much like, but there were cases where they weren't exactly, they couldn't say what they were, and they never took the stand that they were alien life forms flying objects through our atmosphere, but they never said that they weren't either.
Sure.
And so we see this going back and forth all the time, but it has recently. It just seems like that for some reason our government decided to talk about it more when there was really. We had a couple of cases where they saw these Tic Tacs flying around over the ocean and were actually photographed. Part of that, of course, is that we have more capability now to do that. We've had pilots see things like this for a very long time, and there's no real good, suitable explanation for it. You can hypothesize all you will, but I really don't think that we know what these things are, and so I don't have any recent knowledge about these things, but I do watch all the reports with interest.
Sure. Now, when you were working with the Army Missile Command and developing or helping to develop the Hellfire missile program, I understand that the Hellfire probably wasn't designed with this intent in mind, but did you ever have reason to believe that the United States military was attempting to create weapons that may try to counter some of these technologies that are unexplainable?
No, nothing ever came across my desk like that, really. Essentially what the Army Missile Command, which is where I was working, and then later at NASA, what these federal bureaucracies do is work hand in glove with commercial companies.
Mhm.
And so principally what we do over on the federal side is to define our requirements. And we spend
Okay.
a lot of time doing that, defining them and refining them. We want this missile to be an anti-tank missile carried by a drone, have the capability to search out something movement, fire and scoot, and all this different things that we want it to be able to do. But we have to have some knowledge of the technology available in order to do it. But we don't go into deep design, but we do specify. And then the commercial companies pick that up and they make bids on whether they can do it or not, how much it's going to cost, and so on and so forth. I never ran across anything that said that we were trying to counter any kind of unknown alien technology, but we don't really have to do that. We've been through this Cold War, and it seems like, unfortunately, we're about to go through another one.
Yeah.
We do have an adversary that is technologically capable and perhaps in some cases more capable than we are. So we're always trying to counter that using whatever technology that we have or can invent. And we're pretty good about inventing new technology in this country for a variety of different reasons. And we have that infrastructure. So that's about as far as I can take you there.
Do you feel that the analogy that a lot of people tend to fall back on, saying that military technology is 20 or 30 years more advanced than what the civilians have access to typically, does that seem more or less a correct assumption?
Well, in some cases, I would say it was 100 years ahead.
Really?
In some cases, it's less than you think. And so there are a lot of things that we're knowledgeable of that we may or may not ever use. And
What would be an example of something that would be, if you can discuss it, something that would be 100 years more advanced than what the civilians have access to?
camouflage, I would say, as an example. There's a lot of different types of camouflage besides stealth
Sure. You're talking about active
that you know
camouflage, I'm
of.
assuming.
So, I'm sorry?
You're talking about active camouflage, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yes. Being able to be somewhere with something that nobody else can see or have any signature of it at all.
Any signature. So there's
Right.
no IR, there's no thermal, there's no visible, there's no EM signatures coming off of this. You're truly invisible to the entire spectra of measurement.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And
We're
I mean,
much further down the road on that than a lot of people are aware of, which is a little bit scary when you stop to think about it.
it's tremendously scary, but it's amazing at the same time, because if if we do have this technology and if we are employing this technology, you have the predator shimmer and things like that that people sometimes report in association with UFO and UAP phenomena. You're saying that there's a possibility that a lot of this could be military tech.
Well, in terms of warfare, there is nothing that you want more than to be invisible.
Sure.
And that's about as far as I can take you on that. And
Understood.
so yes, I mean, so there are portions of in Department of Defense, especially, that you're aware of a certain technology, and you can't really talk too much about it or even specify it. So it really gets complicated when you get into that kind of thing, because if you can't be invisible if somebody knows how you're invisible,
Sure.
even if there's
Well,
no
that's a
signature.
lot of the issues with the classification process. It's not necessarily, not all the time anyway, is the classification because of the technology, but it might be because of the processes that would be uncovered if that technology or if that event was declassified. So a lot of the times the classification is due to the process by which that event occurred. So I know, we have issues like the Glomar Explorer, which we designed with Howard Hughes back in the day, which was built by CIA funding to go and recover a sunken Russian nuclear submarine. Everybody knows that the Glomar Explorer existed and it did what it did, and that we recovered the submarine. But the process by which the CIA created the funding opportunities to create it, that's still classified. So
Yeah, I mean, the black budget in Department of Defense is huge, and that's part that probably a lot of Congress is not aware of, and they don't even want to be aware of it. It's just budgeted. It's just put away. It's hidden under all kinds of different layers.
these are
Uh,
our $600 toilet seats and $2,000 hammers that get purchased, and the money goes somewhere else, I'm assuming.
well, in defense, $600 toilet seats, that's an average, and there was a lot of preliminary work to design that toilet seat, and then they didn't cost that much after that individually.
Sure.
Let's just say that there's a lot of overhead in the government, and a huge amount of overhead, and that basically you're just spinning your wheels, and you're using the bureaucracy, and all that gets spent, but ultimately you might get something worthwhile out of it, or you don't. We tend to hide our failures, and there are quite a few of those. But then you have an agency like NASA, just to go off in a different angle.
Sure.
NASA is. Let me tell you, when I worked for the Department of Defense for about 15 years, including active duty 6 years and about 9 years with the Army Missile Command, and also the over in Germany with the Army Training Command over there, which was basically we were training armored units to do basically what the Ukrainians are doing to the Russians right now.
Yeah.
So we were getting ready. But when I transferred over to NASA, it was the difference was startling to me. It took me a while. I almost decided I didn't want to work for NASA. It was so different.
What was different about it?
Well, one was, of course, NASA is supposed to be an agency that develops technology that is available for everyone by charter. So when something is invented at NASA, a new kind of rocket engine and so on, it's theoretically available to the world. Unless it comes to NASA through the Department of Defense side, then there's all kinds of different layers of confidentiality about that.
So if NASA invents for example, in a very sophomoric explanation, like if NASA invents a new type of microwave oven to be used specifically in low Earth orbit, microgravity, with new technology and new waveguides and things like that, that would be immediately accessible to commercial enterprise back here on Earth?
Yeah, it's supposed to be. I mean, that's what
Interesting.
NASA is supposed to do. It's a civilian agency that's for the development of space flight for everyone. And it's the way the charter was set up. But it wasn't that so much as it was more or less the laissez-faire of meeting deadlines. In the Department of Defense, you lay out a schedule, and you've got some brigadier, major, general in charge of this schedule, and it's got little milestones all over it that you're going to produce this thing at the other end.
Sure.
And when you have meetings and you stand up and you say, I can't meet that milestone, I'm going to slip it, you're going to get yelled at.
Yeah.
And that includes the contractor. NASA, not so much. I was stunned, at one of the very first meetings where the contractors came in and they were all just slipping their milestones off to the right there. And somebody laughed and said, yeah, we've never failed to meet a redesigned schedule. And it's like, what? I can't believe it. But they were so laid back about it, but they were. And so
why is this? Is this out of design,
like
or
space launch system sliding out forever, and the shuttle slid out for many, many years? Part of that, of course, is the constrained budgets that NASA has compared to DoD.
Okay.
DoD spends as much in a day as NASA does all year long. So NASA is actually, despite its wonderful PR, is actually a tiny little agency within the vast scope of the federal bureaucracy. It punches way above its weight, don't get me wrong, in terms of what people think that's going on with NASA, but it's actually pretty small. It's very constrained in terms of its budget. And I can tell you this, if you want to flip back to the UFO phenomena, is that NASA avoids that like the plague. It wants nothing to do with that whatsoever. It considers it a distraction, and it's gone out of its way not to look for life.
Really?
In the solar system.
Is that because of a stigma, or is that because I wouldn't understand why that they wouldn't want to look for life?
Because it's been made fun of for so many years.
So it's stigma based.
It's a joke. It's a punchline for a comedian. So NASA doesn't want anything. It doesn't want to be tied in any way to the UFO phenomena.
Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Hickam, with NASA's directive of providing science and technology to the public at large, and with their primarily being the only game in town as far as space is concerned, with all of their technology, with all of their equipment, with all of their sensors that they have out there, you would expect that they have something. Whether or not they want to study it, would they not be willing and able and ready, because it's not a DoD project and it is a NASA project? Would they not be able to offshoot that data that they've collected over the last 50 years to a civilian organization such as UAPX, so that we would be able to have access to it and do the dirty work and do the analysis and do what NASA doesn't want to do?
I don't think so. I don't think they want to have anything to do with it. They would stay as far away from it as they conceivably can. You'll notice that, since 1976, when we had the Viking project, where we actually looked for life on Mars, for instance, there's been nothing since that NASA sent up to look for life on Mars or any other planet. And so, again, I can go back historically and tell you part of it. Part of it was when we went to the moon. NASA was charged to go to the moon and carry people to the moon, and they did carry people to the moon, but almost immediately people lost interest in it. There wasn't anything there. It just looked dead, and
right.
And like the high desert times 1,000, and so NASA was basically told, we don't want you to do this anymore. We want you to make space flight cheap. That's it. We're going to let you build the shuttle, and also, by the way, space is we don't care anything about space. We really just want you to look at our planet. So you saw NASA just flip itself on its head, and with Skylab and everything else, it was like everything was, well, there was a telescope to look at the sun, but otherwise it was all about looking back down at Earth. And so for many, many years, that's what NASA was doing, was just looking back down at Earth. In a way, that's still what it's doing with the International Space Station. There's not a telescope on the International Space Station to look out at all. Everything is looking down and worrying about climate change and all this kind of things, which are good things to worry about.
Sure.
But in terms of, I mean, NASA almost had to be forced to go back to the moon. In 1993, I mean, I've always been a moon guy. In 1993, I wrote the technical manual on how we could go back to the moon. And I was shocked that they actually allowed me to publish it as a NASA TM tech manual, because everyone that I talked to from headquarters down to Houston and everywhere else said, Homer, you need to forget this. It's not good for your career to be talking about the moon. We're not going back to the moon. We're going to fly the shuttle forever. We're going to build this International Space Station because that's a good thing to do with the Russians, to keep them on our side. But we're not going back to the moon. So there was really no movement at all within NASA to leave low Earth orbit and looking down at the Earth until Vice President Pence came along, who, by the way, read Rocket Boys and loved it, and then read a novel that I wrote called Back to the Moon. And next thing I knew, I was talking on the phone to Mike Pence, who was saying, Homer, what do you think we ought to do? And of course, I'm saying, well, we need to go to the moon. We need to go there. And again, I go back to my West Virginia roots. I want to see mining towns on the moon. That's what I would like to see. And he liked that idea. And so he came down here to Huntsville, where I live, and said we were going back by 2024. Well, that's been slipped. NASA, again, push it off to the right. And now they're talking about, well, we're just going to the moon to practice to go to Mars, which is silly, because there are zero plans or budget for NASA to carry humans to Mars, and so that's not going to happen. But I hate to belittle that idea, because it's a great idea, and I think maybe somebody like Elon Musk might do it because it's his money.
Yeah,
and he might just do it. But
so
I just don't see NASA doing it at all.
When you wanted to go back to the moon, and still want to go back to the moon, and you invoked the image of mining the moon, what would be the benefit to humanity in doing so?
Well, if this would truly open up space, I don't think we're going to truly open up the solar system until we have a really good reason to do it. And besides science and exploration, all well and good, but if it's like we're spending money from the federal budget to go do this and nothing is coming back to us,
right,
then it's interesting and we will do it to a certain extent, but we're not going to go crazy over it. So if I think the moon is filled with resources, and all the indications are that there are a lot of rare earth elements on the moon that we may need. Of course, we always talk about helium-3, possible fuel for fusion reactors, and so on. We really don't know. Beneath every crater is an asteroid, which is, laced with all kinds of different minerals that we might need. So the moon to me is sort of like New England was back in the 1600s. We're not exactly sure what's there. It might be a good place to go. We need to go look, Sure. And so what we need, I think, on the moon, what NASA should do is a federal agency. It's just like we used to build forts out in the West. You build these outposts, and then the pioneers come and they outfit themselves, they get ready, and then they go out to the hinterlands to see what's out there. So that's why I think that NASA or some federal agency or a number of governments together could build one outpost, at least one permanently human crewed outpost on the moon, from which then commercial entities and other entities could stage there and go out. And let's just look at this near neighbor of ours, this little planetoid that just happens to be going around our planet. And let's just see what's there. And it's relatively easy to get to. And it's very possible that would create a commerce in space, and we start bringing stuff back that would be worth something. I personally think a moon rock is worth something, just a rock. If you stop to think about it, diamonds, the world is filled with diamonds, tons of diamonds, but yet we call them rare when they're really not. And because we've convinced everybody that when you get married, you're supposed to give your girl a diamond. And so, and it's a sign of wealth. Well, what could be a greater sign of love and devotion and wealth than having a moon rock? I mean, just a moon rock is worth a lot of money.
That's brilliant. You need to get De Beers' marketing.
I do see commerce occurring, or that's what I push for. Let's get commerce going on the moon, and then we can see about the other planets. But coming back to my New England analogy, I always, NASA keeps talking about moon to Mars. It's like the Pilgrims using New England as a practice area to go to Antarctica. It's the way that I look at that. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass any kind of smell test to me at all.
So why are they marketing it in that way?
Well, I will blame my buddy Mike Pence for that to a certain extent, and he didn't. He came up with the great idea. Let's go back to the moon. We're going to land on the moon, and we're going to redo that better than Apollo this time. But he didn't. His office didn't do the necessary work with Congress and the president to explain to them how important going back to the moon was, and not this chimera. This bright little bauble that started with a crazy billionaire back in the early 1900s called Dr. Lowell, that Mars was a place that we really wanted to go. So the next thing he knew, before the vice president almost had his speech out of his mouth, we had President Trump saying, "Why are we going to the moon? We need to go to Mars. We've been to the moon." And then Congress comes on top of that. And so it kind of messed us up, and now we have Artemis, which is, they say, well, we're going to the moon so we can go to Mars, which is not true, but it sounds good. So there you go.
Fair enough. But the end goal is getting back to the moon.
To me, that should be the goal. That would, to me, if we could spend the next quarter century developing the moon, and without worrying about Mars. We got robots on Mars that do great. And I'd also look at, if you're really thinking about carrying humans somewhere else, why Mars? I mean, there's some even better places, Titan, for instance, and so on, that to me are more interesting in terms of perhaps human habitation eventually. But you just what was it that some NASA engineer said back during the Apollo days after they canceled it? Well, we just drank the wine they gave us, and that was it. And we went on our merry way. So yeah, it's I have great hope for folks like Elon and so on. That I just love that idea of a billionaire deciding to spend all his money to carry people to Mars. That's great. Do it. Go for it. That's the way I look at it. And we'll use all that technology that you develop for other things as we need it. So that's great.
So going back to this idea that NASA looks down instead of looking up, I think I've known it, but this is the only time that I've actually heard it vocalized. And to me, it's shocking because I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, watching the space shuttle. I was absolutely enamored with the idea of the United States being the country that could get humanity to space. And, everything from the worm logo from NASA to their iconic starfield background, it all pointed upwards to me. And to hear that that's not what NASA wants to do you think that this is kind of a remnant of maybe the old guard, and hopefully with the next coming generation of administrators and scientists working at NASA, that they'll shift their gaze from their feet to their head?
Yeah, I think as the new generation comes along, they're not held back by the past like the folks up in headquarters at NASA are right now. And that's one of the reasons why I love working over at Space Camp and being on the board over there, is that in a lot of ways, since it used to be, well, we used to say that we were going to train space campers like NASA trains the astronauts, and we did that. It was a pretty simple thing. They were just flying the shuttle. So we would train them on everything having to do with the shuttle, just like the astronauts. And now going up the International Space Station, that's pretty simple. But what is beyond that is not going to be simple. We're not exactly sure what spacecraft are going to carry us to the moon. And I mean, we hear what NASA says, but we're not really that sure if that's the way we're actually going to do it, or go to Mars or anywhere else. So with that knowledge, or lack of knowledge of exactly what the future holds, we can train the kids over at Space Camp in any way that we want to. And if we want to put into their heads, you know, what we really need to do is to create an outpost on the moon first, then maybe that's what the people who ultimately end up at headquarters in NASA will want to do.
So the Space Camp is kind of...
So we really want, and that's what we're doing. We have a brand new planetarium over there. So we're training these young people to look out, to look skyward, to see what can be done in that direction. While there's still, of course, this huge impetus to look back on the Earth because of climate change and all of that stuff. So you know, NASA's kind of pulled in several different directions, and we also have a real need to educate people who are in Congress. So we have, I think, about 8 astronauts now that went through Space Camp. I'm looking for the number of Congress people that we send through Space Camp, and also I'd love to see a president that graduated from Space Camp. Then we're going to make some progress.
Sure. So Space Camp itself is not... I have to be honest, I haven't known a lot about Space Camp. I saw that movie back in the late 80s, early 90s, where the kids, you know, accidentally launched themselves on the shuttle and things like that.
Right.
And that was really my only understanding of Space Camp. But you're saying that Space Camp is not necessarily just a camp for kids, but it's also an early intervention program, I guess you could say, for the training and the molding of ideas for people who you hope end up working at NASA.
Yeah, I mean, not only do we want to teach the kids the history of space flight and have them look at all the old rockets and so on, we also want to give them a vision of what we will do and what we can do next, and perhaps what we should do, and get them start thinking down that track. So Space Camp is loaded with simulators that simulate, of course, the spacecraft that now exists. And we have the underwater astronaut trainer that I was part of designing way back in the 1980s, where they can get an idea of what it's like to work in microgravity and so on. So there are a lot of very sophisticated simulators, but there are also a lot of very knowledgeable educators at Space Camp that are, and with wonderful brand new state-of-the-art planetarium, where we can start the kids thinking about what is out there and get them knowledgeable, really, of what is out there. What is Mars really like? What is Venus really like? What is the moon really like? How big is the solar system? What does it take to actually traverse all these vast distances? And what are you likely to find there? What do you want to find there? So in that week that we have these kids, we hope to educate them on the historical past of spaceflight, but also the possibilities of the future.
Is there an active program or an active directive within Space Camp that tries to attack the stigma that you mentioned before, that the current NASA administration is looking down because of? They don't want to acknowledge that UAP or UFO could potentially be real? Is Space Camp putting the idea in the kids' heads that this is something that they may want to consider as an option?
Well, the kids can ask any question that they want, and we don't actively teach that there. But of course, they've seen the Discovery Channel and all the other channels and so on,
Sure.
where all this is discussed, and quite often they'll ask about it, and so I'm not involved in every class. Mostly, I go out and talk to the teachers, and I don't think I've ever had any teachers really ask me about unidentified aerial phenomena or anything like that. They're mostly interested in what can I take back to my classroom to stimulate my kids to make them think about space flight.
Sure.
So it's a very, if it's talked about at all, it's probably over at the planetarium, and that would be a question asked. And but what the answer is exactly by the whoever is leading the discussion that day is kind of up to them. We don't keep them from talking about it, let's say.
Well, let me ask you this. If a child came to you during one of these classes and said, Mr. Hickam, do aliens exist? How would you answer that question?
Well, I'd probably take them back. Let me just say, how would I answer it would be, I'd probably start stuttering like I am right now because I have a billion thoughts about it. And but I would say that anything is possible. But if you want to get into statistics and odds, the odds of intelligent aliens visiting the Earth is vanishingly small.
Okay.
I hate to say that. I really wish it was true, but that's because of my more recent interest in paleontology. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years. And that starts to get me thinking about time. So it's wonderful to think that there might be a universe like Star Trek, where we have a lot of people living on different planets and around different star systems that look a lot like us, except they've got little things glued to their forehead.
Sure.
When we stop to think about that, the Earth is around 4.5 billion years old.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first 2 billion of that, the only thing that there was bacteria.
Yes.
So half of the lifespan of our planet, there's been only one-celled animals. And it's only been in the last 500 million years or so that that bacteria got together and started creating complex creatures that lived and died and ate each other and all that kind of thing. And you have to look at all the different extinctions and the fact that we've got a moon that goes around the planet just at the right place, which causes the tides to go back and forth, and for different ecosystems to be developed. Sure. You look at the fact that we exist, the odds of us existing is vanishingly small. So how do we extrapolate that to the trillions of planets that are probably out there? You've also got to factor in time. And the odds of us existing as versus all of those. So it's all vanishingly small, which doesn't mean that it's not true.
But it only takes one.
It could be. So I'm very cautious about it, except to say that it's unlikely, but there is phenomena that's unexplained. Ghosts are unexplained, but we certainly have a lot of people who believe in them and can give you all kinds of evidence that they exist. So this really gets at it is a phenomena, and it's one that I don't think anybody, I mean, you can believe it to be true. Mm-hmm. Good, great, believe it all day long. That doesn't mean that it's true. It might be. So that's why I stutter when somebody asks me that question.
No, that's a wonderfully open and honest answer, and I appreciate that. During your time, either in the military or at NASA, has anything ever come across your desk that would cause you to reevaluate the statement that you just told me? Something that to you looked as if this was not definitive, but nearly tangible proof that something is out there?
No. That's the honest. Let me tell you, astronauts, if they see anything, are loath to report it.
What about people
Um,
like Edgar Mitchell who have come out and said that it's it's there and he's seen it and he's experienced it?
he's an outlier, and basically, NASA went out of its way to ignore anything that Dr. Mitchell had to say about that subject. Again, I mean, it was very brave of him to say that. It really, I mean, we knew so little when we first started going into space that there were so many possibilities that you may remember that John Glenn reported fireflies in
Yes.
orbit. And a lot
Yes.
of people thought, oh my gosh, the solar system is teeming with life so much that as soon as we go into orbit, we start swatting away fireflies.
Right.
It turned out to be urine crystals. And so from his own ejecta out into space. So I think ever since then, because that became it just blew up in NASA's face, and they just hated to have to tell them that their hero was totally wrong about it. That ever since, astronauts have tended, if they look out there and maybe see something, they might just avert their eyes. They don't really want to see it.
So you strike me as somebody that looks at data and factual evidence and has the ability to compartmentalize that compared to potential personal beliefs or personal experiences. So you've talked about the data and the statistical probabilities. What is your personal belief?
Well, my personal hope is that the universe is teeming with life. That's my personal hope, and as far as I can say in terms of hope versus belief. I have no belief. I have no information or data in front of me that's been presented to me that would make me believe it yet. But we may see it coming if the Webb telescope is successful. I mean, but again, I mean, the Webb can possibly see planets that look a lot like Earth.
Yes.
And that's very important, but you got to realize the Webb is looking out across eons of time.
Yes.
So that's the way that planet looked eons and eons and eons ago. So what does it look like now? We don't know. We don't know. And that's our problem, is that we're dealing with these vast distances and also these vast amounts of time. But to me, that doesn't really denigrate in any way this discussion. It's fascinating when we stop to think about that we do exist, though it's vanishingly small statistically that we would be able to exist and have a brain and a background that makes us want to go outward, to explore, and so on. So it's out there. So and when you look out the numbers, you start crunching the numbers, how many possible planets could have life on them, then how many could actually develop something like a human and then develop a spacecraft and blah, blah. So, that's where you start crunching the numbers, and they become so huge that you almost lose interest in the statistics and go back to, but what if it's true?
Right.
What if it really has happened? And also you have to start thinking of, the supernatural. I mean, perhaps there is I hate to say force, you got to start getting into Star Wars there, but there may be a force in the universe that wants to bring us all together, that wants to is proud of the life that has been created and wants a greater life to be created, a greater system of civilization to be created. There are so many unknowns that we just don't know. We only have the ability to see things, smell things, and hear things through very, very limited brain. And so there are just so many things that we are probably missing in terms of time and distance and
or even the ability to measure our direct reality. We may not be able to process what is right in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, there's some evidence. If you start reading about time, you almost get frustrated because time seems to be a not real. It's a construct. This is not really happening. What's happening is it's a lot of just dots, pixels occurring somehow and kind of conglomerating together in our brain. But then I say that and I go, but wait a minute, if that's true, then how come I go out to Montana and I find these fossils from 65 million years ago? So are you just telling me that time is just right now and it ceases to exist and there's nothing forward to that? It's just right now. But wait a minute, why is all this evidence of all the time that has passed? This evidence that you can put your hands on. So it's really fun to think about. And I do think about it a lot when I'm sitting out there all covered with sweat and dust and dirt and nasty and everything. And I've just picked up a T-Rex tooth. It's really fun to sit there and contemplate that tooth and go, what's the odds that after 65 million years, I, Homer Hickam, just happened to wander down this canyon and pick you up?
Yeah.
I mean, so.
It kind of comes to the idea that, statistics may be just purely invalidated. Because, like Dr. Matthew Shadagas in our chat is saying that, you just need some tidal pools, amino acids, and a couple of billion years, and bingo, you have life. So it might be something
maybe. We have one example.
We do.
And again, you have to look that certain extinctions had to happen at certain times. We also had to have a long period where not much happened except plant growth.
Mm-hmm.
The Carboniferous era. That had to occur before we started getting more complicated life forms. So what did that create? It created coal and natural gas and all of that. And if that period had not occurred, then flash forward 400 million years to West Virginia, we would not have been able to dig down and bring up that nasty black stuff, which, by the way, fueled our civilization as it exists today.
And
we would not have
does.
had that.
Yeah.
So certain things have to happen. And in a planet, again, the odds are vanishingly small that all that's going to come together. But that's as we know it. Maybe there are other ways that life can be formed and other ways that life might be thinking, which is one of the reasons that I often come back to thinking about UFOs and UAPs was that, and we're just like, why do they do what they do? It doesn't make any sense. Well, guess what? They don't think like we do.
Yeah, we can't ascribe human
conditioning. It may be just totally different to them. They're not rational human beings.
Yeah, we can't ascribe emotion or logic or thought processing to them as we do to us because they're not us.
They may not even see us.
This is true.
And so we just don't know. And that's why I come back to ask me the question, do I believe in it? I hope it's true, but I have nothing in front of me that's been presented to me other than some pictures, which are interesting and curious, to make me believe in them any more than I believe in ghosts, which seems to be true. My mother certainly believed in ghosts. She was sure that they existed and told me stories about seeing them. So what are they? And so there's so much unexplained, Jeremy, in the universe, but that's what kind of makes it fun, in a lot of ways. That
tremendously.
Thank goodness that we don't know everything.
Yes.
I mean, how boring would that be, really?
Have you yourself ever had any experience or sighting that challenges your hold on the vanishingly small statistically possible scenarios?
Well, it was back in Colwood, West Virginia. And so it was right before the Russians launched Sputnik. So I wasn't really thinking about this that much. But I was aware of UFOs. I mean, back in the 1950s, it was kind of a hot topic. You heard about it a lot. And I was coming home from choir practice at night on my bicycle, coming up that narrow valley, when all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this, a number of lights come up over the top of the mountain, which, by the way, there are a lot of power lines around there. Come up over the top of the mountain and come swooping down into our little valley and right in front of me. And I looked up and I could see the superstructure. I can see it today. I can see the cross-hatching of whatever was underneath this thing with the lights. And I could see some pale lights back behind there, and then some lights that ran along what seemed to be an edge. And it just moved smoothly right up and then disappeared. And what could that have possibly been? I have no idea. Certainly not a helicopter. No helicopter is going to, in the first place, you would hear a helicopter, and as close as that was to me, it would have blown my hat off for sure. But I have no explanation whatsoever for that until this day. When I got home, I just remember being kind of shaky about the whole thing. And I started to tell my mom, but I just couldn't quite bring myself to tell her. So I didn't tell her or tell anybody much. Probably told some of my friends, who then proceeded to tell me ghost stories, I'm sure. But yeah, I've never been able to explain that in my rational thoughts, what that possibly.
And what year was this?
That would have been around 1956. So,
wow.
And there were a number of sightings, if you remember, in West Virginia in the 1950s of UFOs and strange creatures and so on.
The Mothman.
The Mothman, yeah, Mothman was one of them. Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting.
So you're a person who has actually had a physical sighting directly in front of you that you, to this day, 60 years later, have not been able to quantify, but at the same time, you are so determined to see tangible, hard-coded proof that you're able to separate the experience from what we have in front of us, what we're able to see and feel and touch and read about and understand, that you've been able to separate the incidents apart from each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you get someone who is impressionable, and I mean, this happens with the police interrogations all the time, unfortunately. If you get somebody that's impressionable and you are forceful enough to them, you can make them believe that almost anything happened, including they murdered somebody, right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
I'm a little bit careful. I was a big science fiction reader back then. I was very impressionable. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw, but it's certainly it certainly has stuck with me all these years, and it seemed to be something that was crafted, not anything natural. Again, I can see the bracing. What creature invents bracing for a craft that flies, except for one that has some technology? So I don't know.
So earlier you said, and we were talking about the act of camouflage, you said that this would be something that would be roughly 100 years more advanced than what the civilians have access to now. Do you think that it is 100 years more advanced from today's date, or that it could have been 100 years more advanced from 1956?
Well, 100 years. Well, I guess what I'm really saying when I say 100 years is that you're talking about 20 or 30 years in the future. That's what you mentioned first, was you just extrapolate for what you know. And I'm suggesting that maybe there's something beyond what is known that's actually would look like something maybe you'd have in the 22nd century rather than the 21st.
Gotcha.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
So there's nothing that you could come up with, either that you're free to speak about or that you can't speak about, that would explain the 1956 sighting that you had.
No, it definitely falls into the category of a UFO. It's an unidentified flying object, an aerial phenomena that's unexplained. But again, there have been these myriad of reports. Yeah, and we start breaking them down. Again, we have this mind that's kind of rational, and how can we explain all this? And of course, we come up, well, maybe we have the technology that we're keeping secret, and it just occasionally shows up, and that's certainly a possibility. And then we go to the other extreme, that this is some alien technology that's come in from the outside. So it's like, okay, one or the other. And but if this technology exists, we've done a rotten job of keeping it secret. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. So your work with NASA during the formative period of the International Space Station, you have a lot of ideas and insights and how we are where we are now. Using current events with our tenuous situation that we have with Russia and our former heavy reliance on using Russia for our only means of space travel, and the Russian threats of deorbiting the ISS and things like that. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And how can we save the ISS from this deteriorating relationship that we have with Russia? And do we want to save the ISS?
Well, let's go back to what we did right. I think it was, you got to realize that President Reagan started Space Station Freedom, which we were cutting metal and planning on having a space station called Space Station Freedom. But it was really kind of languishing in Congress. Congress was never really enthusiastic about it. It was, stop start type of funding, and we weren't sure it was going to happen. So Vice President Al Gore was very, very smart to tie that to international relationships, especially the Russians, because after the Soviet Union fell, there were a lot of unemployed Russian engineers who needed work, and the fear was that they would go to North Korea or Iran or our other enemies. And so that was a right thing to do in terms, if we were ever going to have a space station, the best way to do it would be to bring in the internationals, especially the Russians. Congress could see sense in that. So Congress at the time, frankly, cared zip about space, and neither did any of the presidents really. And they were just kind of, because we were expected to have a space program, they were just kind of easing it along. We had the space shuttle. We just keep flying the space shuttle. That's all we were going to do. Yeah. And then the Hubble Space Telescope, little things. I mean, they're big things. They cost a lot of money, but they're little things in a great scheme of things, if you will. And so the idea that we could work with the Russians and have our own, have a space station with them was a really, really good idea in terms of getting support from Congress. We also needed experience that the Russians had, and that was in terms of long endurance spaceflight, which we did not have for humans in microgravity. And also just the operation of a space station. We didn't have much experience in that. So the Russians had that in spades. And so it was a good idea to combine our capability. We also got to remember that we also had the shuttle tragedy Challenger. And up to then, all American spacecraft were supposed to be flown on the shuttle. But after that all dropped away, which left us with shuttles with really not much to do. Right. And so now we had this fleet of shuttles, and we had a International Space Station, and the shuttle turned out to be the best vehicle ever, a little expensive, but the best vehicle ever to build a space station with. After we had built the space station, then we really didn't need the shuttles, and you saw that they got thrown away. And there wasn't any great consternation with the idea that we have this gap where we had no capability of getting humans into space. Again, you scratch Congress, and they don't really care that much about human space flight. So they were willing to let us have this gap until, thank goodness, somebody like SpaceX came along, and even though we had this the idea of having a commercial funding of commercial spacecraft, it was not known whether any commercial company was willing to put up their own money to do this or not.
Oh,
So Elon really saved our American space program in so many ways, but we had that long gap where we were totally dependent on the Russians. Now, do we need the International Space Station? We might if Artemis turns out to be a bust and SLS doesn't work as advertised, and or a lot of different things. If we don't have the International Space Station, we've got no place to go.
right.
And that's one of the reasons that we see NASA pushing it out till 2030, which is way past its the lifespan planned for it, and probably makes sense to have it. It's because they're afraid Artemis is going to not work, and we're going to end up. That's it. We got to have some place for our astronauts to go. But in terms of the Russians, we don't really need them on the space station. I'd hate to see a total breakdown of that partnership. But I'm as irritated with the Russians as anybody else right now. And,
Sure.
they're murdering women and children and everybody over in Ukraine. They don't deserve to be our partners. And I just soon lose them for right now. They need to be punished in some way.
So to kind of go back on the shuttle program, back in the 80s and the early 90s, we relied 100% on the space shuttle. We were launching satellites left and right. We were using the shuttle fleet not only to launch these satellites, but also on these satellites, which signifies that satellites need maintenance and upkeep. After the shuttle program was shuttered, and we have dozens of NRO satellites, classified military satellites, things like that. How did we provide maintenance and upkeep on these satellites without the space shuttle program?
Well, you got to realize the Air Force was never enamored with the space shuttle in the first place, and so they were happy to get taken off of the space shuttle after Challenger, and so they created a expendable launcher program that they much preferred, but they could call up and send into orbit in much more real time than the shuttle, which was always delayed and also very much observable as to what it was doing and what it was carrying. There were, I don't know, about 4, maybe 5 DoD payloads carried by the shuttle that was kept halfway secret, but not really that much.
Right.
NASA leaks like a sieve when it comes to intelligence and information. So they were never really happy with that, and they were happy to go back to the expendable launch system. And they would really prefer not to work with NASA. Truth is known.
So there is a military space program that existed after the shuttle to this day that is up and back and up and back.
Oh yeah. Well, I can point at one of them, the X-37.
Sure, but that's unmanned and robotic. I mean, a manned program. Are you saying that we have manned missions from the military that the general public is unaware of?
No. Again, Department of Defense and humans are just sacks of goo that are easy to kill. It's a lot better, and that's where Department of Defense has put their money, is in robotics and the capability of doing a lot of things in space that it doesn't talk about, that is just not common knowledge.
Sure.
And so Department of Defense, again, spends as much in a day as NASA does all year. And it has a great deal of capability. Could it put people in space? Oh yeah, in a heartbeat, no problem. But it chooses not to, because it doesn't really. Again, when you start putting humans talk,
right.
Humans get killed. Humans have to be explained why you're doing this, and so on, and that you might not come back. So Department of Defense is trying to get away from that as much as they possibly can. That's why we're seeing the drones being so much more sophisticated, and the fighter jets in the future are all going to be. We won't have crews aboard. It'll all be done remotely.
Sure, something like Neuralink.
Yeah, something like that. So.
Interesting. So, and I had a thought that that I really wanted to ask you, and it has vacated my brain. What to you is the most needed thing that the United States could do right now to advance humanity? Is it Artemis? Is it going back to the moon, like you said before, or what is the technological advancement that we need to take this next step?
Yeah, I just don't think that NASA has a clear idea of what it wants to do. Let's just talk about NASA, because that's kind of the face of spaceflight for the United States. Even though that's not where most of the money is spent and where most of the technology occurs, the fact is that NASA has to have a clear idea what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it does. And there are a lot of different reasons for that, about who gets appointed to be the administrators and so on. And they make studies all the time about what NASA should do in the next 10 years and 20 years. They always come back with the same old stuff.
Sure.
So to my mind is that if nothing else, let's just hang our head on commerce. And maybe we can get a clearer idea on what we want to do in space if we say, okay, we're a society that thrives on commerce. We're a monetized society, whether we like it or not, where some people don't like it, some do. But that's the way that humans really work. I mean, there would not have been a Roman Empire if there had not been commerce. That was the whole idea. That's why they went out and conquered all these other countries, was to bring whatever resources they had back to Rome. I mean,
Sure.
That's true for all civilizations. So let's hang our hat on commerce. All right, commerce. How are you going to make money? Don't make money on Mars, not yet. But hey, my goodness, there's that big planetoid that's so close to us that seems to be loaded with resources. I wonder if we could go up there and develop that. Let's send some hardy pioneers. Let's build an outpost and send some hardy pioneers up there and just see. You never know. And oh, by the way, since Apollo, we discovered that, hey, the moon's got a lot of water on it that makes maybe it's meant that we should go do that. So let's just focus on that. And so somebody somewhere along the line in the federal government has to give NASA kind of that thought structure. That's why I get so peeved at NASA and their moon to Mars junk. It just doesn't make sense. Again, that's like pilgrims practicing in New England to go to the South Pole. It doesn't make any sense to me. You go to New England to live in New England. That's right. Why you go there and develop its resources. So, but we'll see. I am a optimistic kind of guy, and sometimes, was it Mark Twain that said God looks after fools, drunks in the United States of America, and so maybe that's true for American spaceflight as well.
Mr. Hickam, I've got a direct question for you on two of them, actually, on behalf of UAPX. As I'm sure you're aware, we are a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to studying the unidentified aerial phenomena. And we have encountered many roadblocks as far as the access to information that we're looking for. We don't research historical cases. We go out and we collect our own data with our own equipment and our own personnel. But quite often we look for corroborative data from ancillary third-party sources, such as, obviously we throw in Hail Marys at the NRO or the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and things like that. But as you're saying that NASA is looking down instead of looking up, they most likely have corroborative data that we're looking for. Yet, even with their directive of being a public organization that shares science and information with the general public, we are being denied on our FOIA requests. We're being countered and roadblocked and everything that you can think of when we look for a specific time and date to corroborate some of the evidence that we've collected. Is there anything that Mr. Homer Hickam can do to point us in the right direction, or hold our hand per se, to help us access the information that we're looking for from an agency with a directive of sharing science with the public?
No. Here's the thing. NASA, Department of Defense, all of them, NRO, all of them will listen to Congress, and that's about it. So they are very reluctant to share anything that they may know about this with a private organization. The best you can do is to get a congressperson on your side to ask these questions, and see if they can. I mean, we've had presidents. I can remember President Carter wanting to have the Pentagon tell me the truth about UFOs. They dodged and hedged and did everything to not tell him. So if the president of the United States can't get the true answer, then what hope do we have? So I think you're doing the right thing, is to work around the edges, ask questions with as many folks as you can, talk to folks that have just recently retired from these organizations who might be willing to give you some information that they would have. So that's, that I don't have any method of helping you there. Really.
Well, that was a Hail Mary that I had to ask that. And two other questions for you, sir. Dr. Shadagas is asking me to ask you what your knowledge is about the Alpha Centauri laser nanoprobe plan for 2069. Is that something that you have any information on?
I don't have anything on that. Sorry.
Okay.
I can tell you this, that there is DARPA is especially very interested in nuclear thermal rocket engines, and is spending quite a bit of money on it.
This goes all the way back to the Orion program, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's beyond that. The technology has improved vastly since that time. So there's a reason why they're looking at this advanced propulsion system, and this is Defense Advanced Research Program.
Yes.
So you can extrapolate from that, as I have, that there's a portion of the federal government that is looking beyond what we see, and they're not making a big deal out of it. I mean, it's in if you look it up, it's in the popular literature, but most people don't look. There's a movement to be able to get out into the solar system in a big hurry. So that's of interest to me, and I'm watching that very carefully.
Interesting. As far as UAPX is concerned, with the limited amount of knowledge that you have on how we operate with, spectroscopy and spectral imaging, RF and radiation detection equipment, is there any advice that you would give us as far as what to look for signature-wise that may help us not necessarily identify definitive alien existence, but to help us separate between domestic technology and what cannot be explained?
Well, every year it's probably more difficult to separate what we're capable of and what we used to think as an alien technology.
Yes.
And a big part of that was when we were able to take humans out of the cockpit. And so now when you see devices being able to twist and turn and zip out of sight and so on, that would seem to be beyond the capability of any human pilot. Well, what does that tell you?
There's no human pilot.
So yeah, I think that it will be increasingly difficult over the years to come to tell the difference, especially since so much of our defense agencies within our government operate with black budgets and
Yeah.
in secret. So it's going to be interesting to watch. But I think the truth ultimately prevails, and organizations like yours will at least get a glimpse of what the truth is in the very near years.
Well, I know you're a very busy man. I would be remiss by not extending an offer of you to entertain the option of joining UAPX and potentially sitting on our board and helping to hold our hand when and where it's necessary. Obviously, that would be a discussion for another time, but it's an open invitation to have that discussion. And as well, UAPX will be presenting with the SCU, the Scientific Coalition for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Studies, in your hometown of Huntsville, Alabama, in the first week of June. And I would like to extend an open invitation for you to join Dr. Shadagas, Dr. Knuth, and Gary Voorhees, and some of the other team members there at the conference, and have a meet and greet and see what type of partnerships might be able to be forged out of that.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. I will look forward to that. And so I'm glad that you're coming to Huntsville, and hope you make it out also to the Space and Rocket Center and tour our great museum out there, and look into the past as well as the future. That
would absolutely love that. Mr. Hickam, is there anything else that you would like to discuss? Let me bring up the link to your book again, and if there's anything else that you want to talk about or discuss. I know we're approaching the almost an hour and a half mark here, and I'll have to let you go shortly, but wanted to open up the floor for anything that you wanted to talk about.
Well, I just say that I really enjoy this type of discussion, Jeremy. I really do. I mean, it opens my thought processes as well. I mean, we all have our personal day-to-day lives and the things that happen around us that are more mundane. It's really, really fun to talk to you and to others in that mindset, and allow our minds to expand a little bit and share things. It's the best way to learn. And I'm always interested in learning new things, and hopefully if I have some knowledge to impart that or thoughts along these lines. So I appreciate our conversation today, and I always appreciate conversations like this. I'm not afraid, as you have noticed, to tell you I don't know, or no, I can't help you. I wish I could. But ultimately, this is how we ferret out the truth, is that we talk amongst ourselves, and we look out and we look for the truth, and we're open to the truth, which is sometimes more difficult than anything, is to be open to the truth and not ducking away from it.
Especially if it goes against a preconceived idea that we've ingrained into our brains.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And so you don't get knowledge without working for it.
Yes.
It doesn't ever come easy. Neither. Well, knowledge may come a little bit easier than wisdom. Wisdom is the hardest thing to acquire.
Absolutely true.
But
well, sir,
I'm always seeking a little wisdom.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all? If you ever make it out to Las Vegas, please let me know. I would be honored to take you out to dinner and have a candid conversation over a beer or three.
Sounds good to me, Jeremy.
All right. And I will be in touch. I want to have that discussion with you about Space Camp, and have some more discussions revolving around potential cooperation between you and UAPX, if you are open to that idea.
All right, great. Well, thank you.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, folks. This has been Homer Hickam, our very special guest tonight. And anybody that has any questions, please feel free to email them, and I will get them out to Mr. Hickam and hopefully keep him engaged in this topic. Thank you very much. And Mr. Hickam, I will be in touch.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Have a good day.